All of us are seeing what's going on in Iran right now. And as someone who has appeared on press TV, Iranian state media, over 400 times, I feel compelled. Someone who has repeatedly defended Iran from imperialist aggression. I do have to say something here. Because then if I don't say anything, it's like, oh, you're supporting their oppression of blah, 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 even though that's a complete non sequitur. But I digress. I would be negligent in not speaking about it. Now, for a while now, I haven't spoken about it because I was trying to get a real read on the situation and understand what's going on. Because if you're looking at what the Western media is saying, you're not really informed. If you're watching only what the Iranian media is saying, I'm afraid you're not fully informed either. Getting the answer to these kinds of situations, or the understanding of what's going on in these situations, will not be solved by consuming media. It will only come through analysis of the situation. Now, getting that information is part of the analysis. That is absolutely true, but it is not the answer. Analysis is the answer. Now, this whole situation exploded because this woman did not want to wear a head covering. And when she was arrested for it, she ended up dead due to circumstances that may actually have been not related to police repression or police abuse, which I suspect it really was police abuse, but the water's kind of murky there. Let's just admit what's true here. It wouldn't, whether or not she was killed by police or killed by a pre-existing condition, would never have happened. Either one wouldn't have happened if she hadn't been arrested for not covering her hair. I wholly disagree with this law. In my personal opinion, it's complete nonsense. The idea that you're going to stop sexual assault or the sexualization of women by covering their hair it's nonsense. Iran has already taken great steps to eliminate sexualized media, which would do a lot to sexualize women, but women simply existing is not something that incentivizes rape or sexual assault or anything like that. This is really a case of where it really is government overreach. I mean, people should be allowed to show their hair. Women, men, anyone should be allowed to show their hair. Because God knows, if the government came to me tomorrow and says, you're not allowed to have a mohawk anymore, we're going to have a fucking problem. Or I have to cover up my hair and you're not allowed to see the mohawk, yeah, we're going to have a fucking problem. Because it's such a huge overreach of government authority. Honest to God, I don't know how you could stand there and say someone shouldn't go to prison for smoking a joint, but saying, yeah, well, it's a different thing for not covering your hair. I mean, come on, really? Are you really going to go in that direction? Look, I think it's a nonsense law that women have to cover their hair. It really is. I think that if certain women want to choose to do so, then by all means. I would still think it's nonsense, but it's their free and fair choice to make. Just ask anybody on Twitter who's ever commented about my hairstyle. They don't seem to like it very much either. And I've got a lot of harsh words for it. But should they have the authority to tell me I'm not allowed to have that hairstyle? Or the government authority to stop me from having that hairstyle? No, obviously not. You know, I rather like it, thank you. And at my age, it's starting to get really thin anyway, so it's probably going to be over soon anyway. Here's the thing. A lot of what's going on in this situation is the younger generation rebelling against the older generation. I would say largely millennials. Millennials that don't like many of the rules that are religiously based that have been handed down by boomers, for the lack of a better term. Now, Generation X, my generation, which culturally there's no comparison between myself and someone who grew up in Iran, But I'm just saying, for reference, that kind of age group seems to be kind of divided. This really does seem to be a movement of young people who don't want to follow these orthodox religious kind of rules. And to be perfectly honest, I think they're right. These kids, many of whom are not kids, they're in their 20s. Some of them in their 30s, many of them even teenagers. Because I have seen some footage of like an entire classroom of teenage girls yelling at this guy come in to talk to them about why they should wear the hijab or whatnot. And then they all start yelling at him and throwing paper balls at him, it's a pretty common thing in high school. I remember people throwing paper balls at people. If the future doesn't belong to them, who does it belong to? The youth have every right to change things if they feel that something is not right. They have every right to want to change things for their society, and it's going to be their society. And not very far in the future, maybe only 10 years, it's going to be theirs. Now, while I have all the respect for the Ayatollah, I'm afraid he's going to have to accept the fact that future generations are not going to agree with him. And that maybe it's time on a lot of these things, they need to step aside and let the younger generation, the people whose future it is, the people who are going to live that future, make those decisions for themselves. And they have every right to determine that. Why does the youth not have a say in the future that they're the ones that are going to be a part of? They have every right to do so. Now, having said that, I would be remiss not to mention exactly how the United States is interfering in this. What is anger at a rule that they feel is unjust? Anger at a woman dying over a headscarf, which is absolutely unacceptable. The U.S. is trying to interfere. They're trying to they're sending money and advisors and underground media to facilitate the overthrow of Iran. Now, the U.S. couldn't give a goddamn about women's rights around the world. If so, they'd be doing something about the slave markets that they created in Libya with the overthrow of Gaddafi, had they actually given a shit about anything. If they gave a shit about women's rights in Islamic countries, explain their long-standing relationship with Saudi Arabia. Yeah, exactly. This isn't about... The U.S. does not care about women in Iran. They care about overthrowing a government that is not an imperialist client of the United States' economic and political interests. That's what this is about. Anytime the United States screams at another country about how they're morally bad and they should be more like the U.S., I have to fucking laugh out of distress, or I'm going to lose my mind of the utter fucking nonsense of that. Who the fuck is the U.S. to talk as if they're morally superior to anyone? The greatest human rights violators that have ever existed in human history. And they are trying to twist these protests from righteous anger at a real injustice into overthrowing the government. Now, the people in the streets who are angry at what has happened in Iran are not trying to overthrow the government. They're angry at an injustice. And their anger is righteous. But this by no means thinks that means they're a revolution trying to overthrow the country and install a pro-U.S. person into power. That's just stupid. When you have U.S. political analysts go on CNN and say, this is the best time that there's ever been to help them overthrow their government. Well, you kind of just admitted you want to overthrow their government, which, by the way, I would remind you is actually illegal. You know, there's this whole thing called the UN, and there's laws in the UN, and overthrowing a country is illegal, or even threatening to overthrow a country is kind of illegal. But, I mean, when it comes to the U.S. and overthrowing countries, I think the UN is pretty much completely useless. But But I think this is the analysis that we need to deal with. The people protesting have a legitimate grievance. And I think that they should be supported in expressing that grievance. And if they want to create that kind of reform, then they have every right to. But to simply believe that this is a desire for a complete revolution and overthrow of Islam is nonsense. Anytime the U.S. speaks, the world should collectively yell, "Shut up," and simply do what's right in this situation. Because God knows the U.S. has no one's best interests at heart. Half the time, they don't even have their own best interests at heart. So that's what we should leave this. A legitimate grievance by legitimate people in the country, and no to U.S. interference. The U.S. should not be allowed to help the protests in any way, shape, or form, because there is no legitimacy to U.S. help in any way, shape, or form. And this, I think, is the legitimate position that we should take. The Iranian people, and particularly the Iranian youth, have every right to decide how their future is going to be. And to be honest, they're really not asking for much. And I think their rights should be respected. And they should not be interfered with by U.S. imperialism or anyone else's imperialism. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.